A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
Hey everyone, my name is Joanna, and I'm sitting down to share something that's been festering inside me for far too long. I'm not proud of what I'm plotting, but sometimes life pushes you to your limits, and all you can think about is how to fight back. If you've ever experienced a neighbor crossing the line, then you'll understand where I'm coming from. Let me paint you a picture of my world. I live in a cozy little 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked away in a small town known for its friendly atmosphere. Except, the past few years have felt anything but friendly thanks to my next-door neighbor, Mark. Mark is one of those people who loves to flaunt his privilege, always strutting around like he owns the place, because, in his mind, he practically does. He's got this enormous lawn which, I'll admit, is beautifully maintained, but it's not just the grass that's been getting under my skin. It's the incessant noise, his loud parties that go on until the early morning, blaring music so obnoxiously it feels like I'm living in a club instead of a suburb. And then there's his attitude. He's got an ego the size of a house and a knack for belittling those around him. I remember the time he scoffed at my garden, calling my flowers weeds and suggesting I stick to low-maintenance plants. It was a small comment, but it stuck with me, as if he were trying to diminish my entire being. I took pride in those flowers, and suddenly they felt like a symbol of my failures in his eyes. It wasn't just his parties or his hurtful comments. It was the arrogance in how he dealt with people that really grated on me. He once threatened to call the HOA on my son's basketball hoop, claiming it was an eyesore. Never mind that the kids in the neighborhood loved playing with it. Mark didn't just want to be the king of his castle, he wanted to reign over mine, too. I tried being the better person. I had coffee with him on occasion, tried to build a rapport, but every time we interacted, I felt like I was just feeding his ego. He brushed off my concerns and laughed at my attempts to be friendly. That's when I realized, no amount of kindness would ever reach him. So here I am, in this self-imposed exile of anger and resentment, concocting a plan to inconvenience him just enough to knock him off his pedestal. I know revenge isn't the answer, but in my heart, it feels like the only way to reclaim my sense of peace in a neighborhood that's become a battleground. And thus begins my journey, a quest not for destruction, but for some small measure of justice. I'm reaching out to all of you, hoping to channel my frustration into something creative, clever, and maybe even a little fun. Welcome to my world of quiet rebellion, where I'm about to make Mark regret ever crossing paths with me. The tipping point came last summer, a scorching afternoon when the entire neighborhood was parched and on edge. I had just finished mowing my lawn, beads of sweat lining my forehead, when I heard muffled laughter and music drifting from Mark's backyard. I was annoyed, but I tried to shake it off. After all, summer was for gatherings, right? But this wasn't just a small gathering, it was an all-out bash. I tried to focus on the flower beds, pruning and pulling weeds, but the music only grew louder, accompanied by the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. An hour into their revelry, my son Jake came outside, frustrated and red-faced. "Mom, I can't hear myself think. Can we go to the park or something?" That was my breaking point. It wasn't just the noise, it was the blatant disregard for the rest of us living on this street. I looked over the fence and saw Mark lounging in his inflatable pool, a smug smile plastered on his face, orchestrating his guests as if he were a celebrity at a private event. My heart sank. This was the man who had the audacity to call my flowers weeds, and now he was putting my family's comfort on the back burner for his self-indulgence. The evening dragged on, and after nearly 3 hours of chaos, I finally snapped. I stormed over to his yard, my heart pounding and my fists clenched at my sides. I could feel the stares of guests as I approached, but I didn't care. I demanded he turn down the music. To my utter disbelief, he laughed in my face, an obnoxious, mocking sound. "Lighten up, Joanna. It's just a party. If you can't handle it, maybe you should invest in some earplugs." My cheeks burned with humiliation. I turned on my heel and walked away, anger bubbling inside me like a simmering pot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was powerless while he reveled in his self-made kingdom. The next day, I discovered that my 15-year-old son had been bullied at school for being the kid whose mom can't even get her neighbor to turn down his music. That was when Mark crossed the line. He hadn't just trampled my peace, he had affected my child. I called my husband, crying, my voice trembling as I recounted the events. His response was to let it go, to rise above it and take the high road. But how could I, when Mark had turned my home, a place of solace, into a source of anxiety and humiliation? Days turned into weeks of simmering resentment. Each time I saw Mark in his backyard, basking in the sun, a knot twisted tighter in my stomach. Every time I heard laughter echoing between the fences, it was a reminder that I was stuck in a one-sided war. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. But in that darkness, something started to shift within me. I began to fantasize about little inconveniences, small annoyances that would disrupt his precious routine. The thought of him feeling the way I had felt that day became intoxicating. Each idea felt like a spark igniting a fire, my rage morphing into a strategy. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be disrespected, to lose a little bit of that smug smile, a chance for him to taste the bitterness of his own arrogance. As the summer heat persisted, I started to plan. It was time for Mark to realize that he wasn't untouchable, that his reign over the neighborhood wasn't as absolute as he believed. I would no longer be the silent neighbor next door. The games had begun, and I was ready to play mine. I needed help, though, ideas that could make my plans not only effective but also deliciously entertaining. And so, here I am, pouring out my heart to you all, hoping together we can craft the perfect, harmless revenge. Because sometimes, the most satisfying victories come not from grand gestures but from subtly orchestrated inconveniences that remind the arrogant of their humanity. The first week of my plotting felt like a pressure cooker simmering just below a bubble, but soon, the heat intensified. I decided to start small, a few harmless pranks that would send a subtle message. With the help of some online forums, I gathered ideas, annoying yet lighthearted tactics that could disrupt Mark's routine without crossing any lines. I mean, who wouldn't want to mess with a lawn that was so proud and ostentatious? I took to the local hardware store, purchasing some fake for sale signs that I could accidentally stick in his yard during one of his loud parties. I convinced myself it was harmless, a way to poke fun at his inflated sense of self-importance. It felt good to laugh about it, to think about how it would make him squirm. But what began as innocent mischief quickly spiraled into something more sinister. One night as I was preparing for bed, I heard Mark's party kick off again. The volume was unbearable, the vibrations creeping through my walls as if the bass was in my very bones. I snapped. I started pacing, a whirlwind of frustration swirling around me. In that moment, my innocent pranks transformed into a fury I hadn't anticipated. I stepped outside, my heart racing, and began to fill a bucket with ice water, ready to spill it over the fence just to see the shock on his face. I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? But then I thought about my son, about the way Mark had ridiculed him. In my mind, it felt justified, until I spilled the water, not over Mark, but onto my patio. It hit the wooden boards with a loud thud, echoing back my failure. It was that very evening that I made my first real move. I found an anonymous number and sent a complaint to the HOA about the noise, listing the violation of local noise ordinances. The thrill of that small act was intoxicating. I felt like I was finally taking control, but it also stirred something deeper inside me, a taste for vindication that I hadn't expected. But then, the retaliation came. Just 2 days later, Mark confronted me while I was gardening, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a storm brewing in his eyes. "Joanna, I know it was you. You had to stoop low enough to drag the HOA into this?" His voice dripped with condescension, the smug smile replaced by anger. "You could have just talked to me like an adult. But I guess that's too much to expect from a woman like you." Each word cut into me like a jagged knife. I thought I was getting even, but instead, I had opened myself up to his disdain. I felt like a coward and a fool, standing there with my gardening gloves on, vulnerable under the weight of his contempt. I tried to defend myself, but my voice wavered, and the self-assuredness I had mustered crumbled under his glare. That was when I noticed the other neighbors peeking from behind their curtains, their eyes wide, whispering among themselves. I was suddenly the subject of their scrutiny, a neighbor who had gone too far in seeking revenge. Mark had turned my innocuous attempts into a spectacle, and I was the one left humiliated. After that confrontation, I no longer felt like I was wielding the power. Instead, I felt exposed, as if I was holding a loaded weapon with the safety off. It wasn't long before Mark retaliated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every morning, just as the sun peeked over the horizon, he would start his yard work, mowing the lawn or power washing his driveway with the volume cranked up to 11. I would scramble to close the windows, desperate to drown out the din, but it was futile. It felt like he was out to make my life hell, determined to show me who was boss. Then, I found out he had convinced our neighborhood association to ban my son's basketball hoop entirely. They claimed it was a safety hazard, but I knew it was Mark pulling strings behind the scenes. When my son came home with the news, utterly crushed, I felt a surge of anger that blotted out everything else. I called my husband again, this time in a frenzy, demanding he do something to support our family against Mark's unreasonable actions. His response was still the same: just ignore him, Joanna. Don't let him get under your skin. But how could I? The pressure was building, and my efforts to reclaim my space were morphing into a war I never intended to wage. As summer wore on, the situation grew more volatile. My pranks became bolder, more elaborate as I searched for ways to undermine Mark without getting my hands dirty. I had arranged to have a dozen inflatable flamingos delivered to his yard during one of his notorious soirees. I could hardly contain my laughter as I imagined him stepping outside to find a lawn full of bright pink nuisances. But every action had consequences. Mark retaliated by putting up a wooden privacy fence, towering over the existing one, blocking out sunlight from my little garden. And with that, any remnant of peace I had left began to evaporate. In my heart, I still believed I was fighting for the neighborhood against arrogance, yet with every prank that backfired, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. The spiral continued, each act of revenge fueling another wave of retaliation, and soon I realized I was trapped in a cycle of escalation that was consuming my peace and sense of self. What had begun as a simple desire for justice had now turned into a toxic dance of vengeance. I needed help more than ever, not just in plotting more inconveniences, but in finding a way to reclaim my dignity without losing myself in the process. With every passing day, my anger transformed, and I had to face the truth: I was becoming just as arrogant as Mark. It was time to decide whether I wanted to rise above it or continue down this dark path of revenge. I needed to break the cycle, but how? It was a sweltering August afternoon, and I found myself staring at the blank wall of my bedroom, the sunlight filtering in through the curtains creating patterns on the floor. My head spun with thoughts of revenge, each idea more ludicrous than the last. I could feel the bitterness in my stomach, an unsettling mixture of anger and sorrow swirling within me. I was exhausted, physically from the petty clashes with Mark, and emotionally from the guilt creeping in. That day, I had just finished an exhausting 3-hour battle against my inner turmoil. I had spent the morning dissecting my latest prank, filling his lawn with hundreds of plastic flamingos. I had imagined his face contorting in disbelief, perhaps even the hint of a smirk crossing my lips as I envisioned the chaos it would unleash. But the moment I started to gather supplies, a deep, gnawing feeling settled in my gut. Was I really going to stoop to his level? As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed insistently next to me. It was Jake, sending me a photo of his latest game, a snapshot of him and his friends at the park, all laughing, all free from the chaos that had engulfed our home. The contrast between my son's carefree smile and the heaviness in my heart struck me. I had been so preoccupied with my own bitterness that I had forgotten what this was truly about: my family, my peace, my son's happiness. In that moment, clarity washed over me like a cool breeze. I realized that I had been consumed by a cycle of petty revenge that was damaging not only my relationship with Mark but also my own inner peace and my family's happiness. I had allowed this neighbor to become the architect of my misery, and in turn, I had become the architect of my own discontent. It was a revelation that shook me to my core. I couldn't keep going down this path. This wasn't me, this wasn't the Joanna I wanted to be. In my quest for justice, I was losing sight of who I was as a person. I didn't want to be that neighbor, the one recognized for pettiness and spite. I wanted to be the person who could rise above it all, who could handle conflict with grace, even in the face of Mark's arrogance. But how? The question lingered, echoing in my mind. I needed to find a way to stand up for myself without resorting to childish antics or going to war. It was time to reclaim my power, not through revenge but through assertiveness. I began to formulate a new plan, one focused on communication rather than conflict. What if I directly confronted Mark, not with anger but with clarity? I needed to show him the impact of his actions, not just on me but on our entire neighborhood. I wanted him to understand that he wasn't just affecting me, but the community we both lived in. That evening, I walked outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and as I approached the fence that separated our yards, I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about restoring balance. When I saw Mark outside, tending to his infamous lawn, I felt my heart race. I approached him, my hands trembling slightly, but I pressed on. "Mark, can we talk?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face before settling into that familiar smirk. "What's the matter, Joanna? Had enough of your little pranks?" My heart sank for a moment, but I pushed through. "No, actually. I wanted to discuss how we can coexist better. I feel like our recent conflicts have escalated, and it's affecting not just us, but everyone around us." To my astonishment, the smirk faded. I could see a hint of uncertainty in his eyes as if he wasn't expecting this approach. It was a glimmer of hope. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shot back, but there was a hesitance in his tone. I pressed on, speaking with conviction. "Your parties have been loud enough to disrupt my family's peace, and you've made hurtful comments that have affected my son. I want to find a way to communicate openly instead of resorting to pranks or complaints. Can we work on this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, I thought he would dismiss me entirely. But instead, he sighed, the weight of our unspoken tension hanging between us. "Fine. But you need to learn to lighten up. I'm not here to hold your hand." I felt a flicker of victory in that moment. We hadn't resolved anything yet, but the door had been opened. I was no longer the faceless neighbor next door. I was Joanna, a person willing to confront the chaos instead of hiding behind petty revenge. It was then that I understood, my journey wasn't just about inconveniencing Mark. It was about reclaiming my dignity, rebuilding my strength, and finding my voice in a neighborhood that had become a battleground. That day marked the turning point in my story, a moment where I chose growth over bitterness, where I decided that the best way to disrupt Mark's reign wasn't through revenge but through genuine communication. And while I still felt the echoes of anger and resentment, I now had the tools to conquer them, not by fighting fire with fire, but by building bridges instead of walls. From that moment on, I was determined to face whatever came next with courage, to reclaim my space, and, perhaps, to transform this chaotic mess into a chance for a new beginning. Because ultimately, real power lies not in vengeance, but in the strength to reach out and connect, even with those who may seem impossible to understand. I still needed help, but this time, it was to gather ideas on how to foster a sense of community, to build relationships rather than destroy them. I was ready for a new chapter, one that focused not on revenge but on harmony. And with that realization, I took a step back from the precipice of chaos and began to walk toward a brighter future, one conversation at a time. All right, folks, this is where things get creative. I've spent sleepless nights plotting, thinking of ways to execute a plan that would get under Mark's skin without resorting to sabotage or anything too drastic. My intention isn't to become the villain, it's to remind him that his arrogance has consequences. With that in mind, here's the detailed plan I've crafted, a series of clever, light-hearted inconveniences to nudge him toward humility while keeping the neighborhood peace in mind. 1. The prankster's scavenger hunt. I'll create a neighborhood scavenger hunt that involves Mark's precious lawn. I'll invite our neighbors to participate, giving them a list of playful items to find in Mark's yard, things like a rubber chicken, a gnome wearing sunglasses, and a collection of colorful pool floats. Each item will be placed discreetly but in such a way that it's visible enough to be noticed. The goal isn't to destroy anything but to fill his yard with unexpected, comical surprises that will make him the talk of the neighborhood, all while keeping the tone playful. 2. The barbecue bonanza. It's time for a neighborhood barbecue, but here's the twist. I'll check with the HOA to reserve the park for a community get-together on a Saturday when Mark typically has his loud parties. I'll send invites to everyone, subtly hinting that it would be fantastic for them to enjoy a relaxing Saturday afternoon with games, food, and fun right when Mark is planning his next bash. This way, his loud music won't be the only sound echoing through our suburb, it'll be laughter and camaraderie from the community uniting against the noise pollution he creates. 3. The mysterious noise complaint. In collaboration with a couple of neighbors who share my frustrations, I plan to submit ambiguous noise complaints to the HOA every time Mark throws a party. The complaints will be vague enough so that they can't be attributed directly to me, like disturbing sounds late at night without specifying what those sounds are. It'll create a ripple effect, and eventually, Mark will find himself questioned by the HOA about his noise levels. For someone who thrives on being the center of attention, being called out for rowdiness will be a significant blow to his ego. 4. The gardening gambit. I will plant a flower bed in the front yard that mirrors Mark's prized garden but with a quirky twist. In between my beloved flowers, I'll add wild elements like brightly colored painted rocks or whimsical garden decorations to create a contrast that's impossible to ignore. I'll make sure the arrangement is vibrant and eye-catching, so much so that it almost feels like a challenge. When he sees my playful rebellion, it'll serve as a reminder of how far he went to belittle my gardening skills. 5. The community newsletter. I'll start writing a monthly community newsletter, spotlighting the positive aspects of our neighborhood while subtly addressing issues like noise pollution. In a lighthearted tone, I'll include sections dedicated to noisy neighbors of the month and focus on promoting understanding and compassion among neighbors. It'll be cheeky, think let's all be the type of neighbor we'd like to have type of vibes. If Mark catches wind of this, he may start to feel the pressure of public perception shifting against him. 6. The Local Hero Initiative. I'll organize a Neighborhood Hero Initiative where we celebrate community members doing good deeds. I'll nominate myself and others who have contributed positively to our street and encourage them to do the same. Who knows? Maybe Mark will want to participate, and I can challenge him to do something beneficial for the community instead of partying every weekend. This can create a platform for conversation about respect and neighborly love, forcing him to reevaluate his approach. 7. The claim to fame. I'm going to create a faux award titled Best Lawn of 2023 and present it to myself, just for fun. To make it even more entertaining, I'll invite Mark over, and during a casual gathering, I'll unveil it while making a lighthearted speech about how a perfect lawn means peace and quiet for the neighborhood. I'll even get a funny trophy with a lawnmower on it. Watching him squirm while I highlight the importance of neighborly respect will be oddly satisfying. 8. Involving local media. If all else fails, I might just reach out to the local newspaper with a lighthearted pitch about our community's quirky neighbors. My intention would be to highlight how everyone can coexist harmoniously, using humorous anecdotes that could include a mention of the loud party next door without directly calling anyone out. If it garners attention, it could bring the consequences of his actions to a larger audience he never expected. With my plan laid out in detail, it's time to put it into action. The beauty of this approach is that it's layered with humor, it doesn't feel aggressive and reflects more on his behavior than my own. The key will be timing and ensuring that each prank or plan unfolds smoothly, keeping the spirit lighthearted and maintaining my integrity throughout the process. Of course, I'll have to tread carefully to avoid crossing the line into vindictiveness, but I'm feeling invigorated by the idea of reclaiming my space without losing sight of who I am. The first step will be the scavenger hunt, and from there, I can build on my ideas, adjusting them as I see fit based on Mark's reactions. Ultimately, I want to create a sense of community that contrasts sharply with Mark's self-absorbed attitude. My hope is that through these clever inconveniences, we can reclaim our neighborhood. Not just for me but for everyone who has felt belittled or marginalized because of one arrogant neighbor. Because in the end, it's not just about getting back at Mark, it's about standing up for what's right and reminding him that respect is a two-way street. And who knows? Maybe in the process, I'll even find a way to mend the rift between us, a long shot, but worth a try. Let the games begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air around me crackled with anticipation. I had meticulously plotted my course of action, and tonight marked the beginning of my carefully crafted revenge, a series of lighthearted inconveniences that would disrupt Mark's status quo without igniting an outright war. I could feel the tension coursing through my veins as I stood at the edge of my yard, peering through the slats of the fence that separated our properties. The night was alive with activity as laughter and music spilled from Mark's backyard. I could see the silhouettes of guests dancing, their movements exaggerated in the dim light. A wicked grin crept across my face. This was it, the perfect moment to unleash the first part of my plan. The scavenger hunt would unfold under the veil of his party, a delightful surprise that would make him the unwilling host of chaos. I gathered the supplies I had hidden in my garage, a collection of inflatable flamingos, rubber chickens, and brightly painted rocks. I felt like a mischievous sprite, cloaked in the dark, ready to unleash some whimsy upon this self-absorbed king of the cul-de-sac. My heart raced as I crept toward his yard, fueled by the thrill of executing my plan. The first few items went unnoticed, the music drowned out any sound of my sneaky movements. I planted a rubber chicken right in the center of his meticulously manicured lawn, striking a perfect balance between absurdity and annoyance. Then, I tossed an inflatable flamingo into his pool with a splash that echoed through the night, sending ripples of color across the water's surface. Each item I positioned felt like a little victory, a whimsical jab at the man who had made my life unbearable. But it wasn't until I placed the last flamingo, artfully arranged around the party's gathering point, that I felt a rush of exhilaration wash over me. As I turned to retreat, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the window. There he was, the king of his domain, unaware of the delightful chaos unfolding just outside his carefully curated bubble. As I slipped back into my yard, my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't wait for the reactions from the guests, the laughter, the confusion, the bewilderment that would surely ensue. But I wasn't done just yet. The barbecue bonanza was next on my agenda, and I was determined to make it a night to remember for everyone in the neighborhood, except for Mark. I gathered my neighbors, those who had shared my frustrations, and invited them to the park the following weekend for the community barbecue. As we set up, the air buzzed with excitement and camaraderie, a stark contrast to the discord Mark had sown. Our laughter echoed through the warm evening air, and I could feel the tension melting away as we grilled burgers and shared stories, creating a tapestry of connection that had been missing for so long. But I still needed to make my point clear. I took a moment to send a text to Mark, letting him know about the barbecue and inviting him to join. "Hey Mark, we're having a neighborhood barbecue in the park this Saturday. It'll be great to see everyone together. Let's celebrate our community." I hit send, my heart racing. Would he have the humility to join us? Or would he simply ignore the invitation, continuing his reign of singularity? As we gathered around, neighbors began to trickle in, bringing dishes to share, and I couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration that surged through me. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled food, and laughter filled the space, a sound I hadn't enjoyed in ages, overshadowed for so long by Mark's loud parties. At the height of our gathering, I noticed a figure approaching in the distance, unmistakable in the fading light. It was Mark, striding toward us with a mixture of curiosity and irritation etched on his face. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swelling within me. Would he confront me in front of everyone, or would we find a way to bridge this gap? As he reached the edge of the gathering, I approached him, a smile plastered on my face. "Hey, Mark. Glad you could make it." He raised an eyebrow, looking around at the crowd with a forced smile. "What's all this? A party without me? I thought I was the life of the neighborhood." "Just trying to foster community spirit, Mark," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You know, something we've all been missing for a while." He scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "Is that what this is? A bunch of neighbors trying to gang up on me?" I could feel the tension in the air, but I pushed through. "No, it's not about that. It's about reminding ourselves what it means to be a community. You don't have to throw parties for everyone to have fun together." For a moment, silence hung between us. The laughter of the neighbors faded into the background, and I could sense the weight of his pride pressing down on him. Just as I began to doubt whether this conversation was worth it, a neighbor stepped forward, offering Mark a plate of food. "Hey Mark, grab a burger. It's good to see you here." To my surprise, Mark hesitated but then took the plate, joining the gathering. As the evening wore on, we engaged in small talk, and I could see subtle shifts happening around us, other neighbors welcoming him, forcing him to participate in this community feel. The tension was still there, but it was beginning to soften under the weight of shared stories and laughter. Just as I thought the night couldn't get any better, I caught sight of my eldest neighbor, Mr. Thompson, making his way toward Mark. "You know, Mark," he began, "your parties are definitely lively, but don't you think a little balance wouldn't hurt? We'd love to have you join us more often. We want to get to know you better, be a part of this community, and honestly, we could use some of that energy on a weeknight too." Mark stared, caught off guard by the unexpected push from Mr. Thompson. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the bravado in his posture faltering. "Yeah, maybe I could swing by," he grumbled, the arrogance slowly seeping away from his tone. As the evening drew to a close, Mark and I found ourselves standing side by side, the previous animosity replaced with an unspoken understanding. He turned to me, a hint of vulnerability flashing in his eyes. I didn't realize how much I'd isolated myself. Maybe I should be more involved. "I appreciate you reaching out." My heart swelled. This was a moment of poetic justice, a small victory for the woman who once felt powerless. In confronting Mark while managing to maintain a sense of humor and community, I'd reminded him that his arrogance came with consequences, and that perhaps, even he could learn to be humble among neighbors. As we wrapped up the barbecue, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. My journey hadn't been about revenge at all, it had been about reclaiming my place in the neighborhood while also challenging Mark to look beyond his ego. With every moment spent laughing and connecting, we were redefining our relationships, turning an enemy into a potential ally. As the stars twinkled above, I realized that revenge had morphed into something far more powerful, the chance for healing, growth, and a renewed sense of community. I went to bed that night, not just feeling victorious but liberated, no longer shackled by anger but instead surrounded by the warmth of friendship and understanding. Perhaps, just perhaps, Mark and I could forge a new path forward. And as I drifted into a peaceful sleep, I understood that sometimes the most satisfying rebellions come not from petty revenge but from compassion and forgiveness, a lesson I would carry with me long after the final echoes of laughter faded into the night. The days following our barbecue were filled with a mixture of anticipation and reflection. In the wake of what I had once envisioned as a grand act of revenge, I found myself caught in an unexpected cycle of growth and transformation. I had stepped into the realm of confrontation, and instead of chaos, I was met with the possibility of reconciliation. Mark's shift was palpable, his posture softened as he engaged with the neighborhood in ways I hadn't thought possible. He began to host less ostentatious gatherings, opting for quieter afternoons filled with barbecues that included the very neighbors he had once dismissed. I watched as he made an effort, contributing his culinary skills and slowly dismantling the barriers he had built around himself. This was the same man who had once ridiculed my flowers, and yet here he was, actively participating in discussions about community improvement and engagement. I found myself torn. Had I inadvertently made a friend out of an enemy? As my initial thrill of victory faded, I felt a mix of relief and discomfort. I had wanted to inconvenience Mark, to remind him of his arrogance and how it affected all of us. But instead, I had given him a chance to reflect and grow. My heart grappled with the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, people could change if given the opportunity. Jake, my son, noticed the changes too. He had been skeptical of me at first, the pranks, the plots, the focus on revenge. But as Mark started to engage more with our family, inviting Jake to join in his backyard soccer games, I could see the walls of discomfort begin to crumble. My son's laughter filled the air once more, and I was reminded of the primary driving force behind my actions, the well-being of my family. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still felt the echoes of resentment that had once fueled my every interaction with Mark. When neighbors would chat about his newfound civility, I caught myself brushing off the compliments with a twinge of indignation. It was hard to reconcile my initial instincts with the man he had become, and sometimes I found myself resentful of the fact that he seemed to be basking in the glow of redemption without fully acknowledging the pain he had inflicted on me and others. One afternoon, while pruning the flowers in my garden that I had grown to love, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the slats of the fence, tossing a soccer ball with Jake. An unexpected wave of emotion washed over me, pride, relief, and an overwhelming sense of bittersweet loss. My plan had worked, but at what cost? I had aimed for revenge, only to craft a bridge instead. That evening, as I settled into the soft embrace of my couch, I pondered everything that had transpired. My thoughts drifted back to my initial resolve, the desire for a small measure of justice. In the end, I found myself grappling with a deeper realization. I had gone into this journey seeking revenge, and yet I emerged with something much more profound, a chance to foster compassion and growth, not only for myself but for those around me. A few weeks later, as the summer days shortened and the crisp air of autumn began to seep in, I received an unexpected text from Mark. "Hey Joanna, I'm planning a neighborhood cleanup day next Saturday. We're all in this together, right? Hope you and your family can join." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. It was a simple invitation, but it was also a challenge, a way for us both to officially acknowledge the shift in our relationship. I realized that although Mark had changed, I had to meet him halfway. I responded with enthusiasm, eager to support the initiative while also grateful for the evolution of our neighborly connection. As that Saturday dawned bright and clear, I stood alongside Mark, a stark contrast to the animosity that had once defined our interactions. The neighborhood came alive with laughter and teamwork as we pulled weeds, picked up litter, and shared stories. It was a newfound camaraderie, and I couldn't shake the feeling of hope that filled the air. At one point, as we took a break, Mark turned to me. "I owe you an apology, Joanna. I didn't realize how blind I'd become to the community around me. Thank you for pushing me to be a better neighbor." In that moment, all the anger and resentment I had harbored began to dissolve. I nodded, understanding the complexities of change and growth. "And I appreciate you being willing to listen," I replied, my voice steady. "Sometimes it just takes a little nudge to see what really matters." As the sun set over our neighborhood that evening, I realized I had come full circle. What began as a quest for petty revenge had transformed into a journey of empowerment and connection, an opportunity to foster community instead of division. I had confronted my anger, embraced my vulnerability, and forged a new path forward not just for myself, but for everyone around me. Sometimes, I thought, the greatest victories come not from striking back but from reaching out. In the end, it didn't matter whether I inconvenienced my neighbor or not. What truly resonated was the knowledge that I could choose compassion over chaos, understanding over indignation. As I lay in bed that night, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not for my cunning plans but for the unexpected friendships that emerged from the depths of conflict. It was a reminder that every relationship, regardless of its rocky beginnings, holds the potential for healing and transformation. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, my heart lighter than it had felt in a long time, the remnants of anger finally giving way to hope, peace, and the blossoming of newfound connections. Because in the grand tapestry of life, each thread, each clash, and each gentle understanding stitched together the fabric of our shared existence, a vibrant community, alive and thriving, forged in the fires of conflict and the embers of friendship. So, if you find yourself in a similar situation, remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against arrogance isn't revenge, it's humanity and the willingness to be better, together. Hey there, my name is Joanna. I'm a 32-year-old marketing professional living in a cozy little suburban neighborhood that's supposed to be a peaceful haven, you know? The kind of place where you wave to your neighbors and have block parties in the summer. But let me tell you, peace is a fragile facade, easily shattered by a single obnoxious act. It all began on a crisp October evening, just as the leaves were turning shades of fiery red and orange. I had just returned from a long day at work, exhausted and looking forward to curling up on my couch with a cup of chamomile tea and a good book. But as I pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. There it was, Kyle. My neighbor, a self-proclaimed car enthusiast, had parked his monstrous lifted truck right next to my petite sedan. His truck was a behemoth, towering over my car like a hulking giant. And to top it all off, he left just enough space for me to barely squeeze in without risking a scratch on my already battered paint job. Kyle was everything I despised about my neighborhood, a loud, egotistical man whose idea of fun seemed to involve revving his engine at all hours and blasting music that rattled the windows of my home. He boasted about his truck like it was a trophy, often mocking my car's modest size whenever the chance arose. We didn't have a history per se, but I had learned to keep my distance from him. His arrogance was an impenetrable wall, and I had no desire to scale it. As I fumbled to get out of my car, I could already feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time Kyle had pulled this move. In fact, it felt almost like he was testing the waters, pushing my patience to see how far he could go. My heart raced as I imagined confronting him, the words building up in my throat, but part of me hesitated. Would it even matter? Would a drunken rant simply fuel his ego further? As I glanced at my cramped driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that my kindness and patience had been mistaken for weakness. And that's when the idea hit me, a spark igniting in the back of my mind. What if, instead of letting him get under my skin, I turned the tables? The thought was audacious, and I could almost hear the thrill of vengeance whispering in my ear. But as I stood there, staring at the monstrous truck that occupied my space, a sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't going to let Kyle's arrogance go unchecked anymore. No more playing the role of the nice neighbor while he tramples all over my boundaries. The lines had been drawn, and like a dormant volcano ready to erupt, I could feel the simmering rage building within me. Little did I know, this would set off a chain reaction that would not only shake the foundation of our neighborhood dynamics but also teach Kyle a lesson about respect. As I took a deep breath, I realized this was just the beginning. I hadn't even stepped inside my house when the storm of emotions surged within me. I tossed my bag onto the kitchen counter and paced back and forth through the narrow hallway. A knot tightened in my stomach as I replayed the scene. Kyle, standing by his truck, casually tossing me a dismissive glance as if my irritation was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance to him. It wasn't just about the parking, it was the principle of it all. You see, I had always prided myself on being the calm, collected neighbor. The one who offered freshly baked cookies during the holidays and organized the annual community cleanup. I wanted to be that neighbor, someone who brought people together. But Kyle's blatant disregard for basic decency made me question everything. How could someone be so inconsiderate? He made a mockery of my efforts to foster a friendly environment, and his arrogance felt like a personal slap in the face. He had crossed the line, and each time I saw that truck parked too close to mine, it felt like a reminder of his power over me. It was infuriating. I was usually the type to give people the benefit of the doubt, but Kyle made that impossible. Every time I had to squeeze into my own car, every time I heard his engine roar to life at an ungodly hour, I could feel my skin crawling. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a daily reminder that he didn't respect me, or anyone else, for that matter. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I found myself tossing and turning, unable to shut my mind off. Why should I let him win? I thought. He didn't know me. He didn't know the hours I worked just to afford a safe place to live, the sacrifices I made to keep my life afloat. He was a reminder that some people took pleasure in wielding their privilege like a weapon, and it struck a chord deep within me. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I woke up with a newfound resolve. I would no longer let his rude behavior dictate how I felt or how I lived. It was time to show Kyle that he wasn't the only one who could play games. I had a few tricks up my sleeve, after all. I started small. Instead of parking in my usual space, I pulled my car to the very edge of my driveway, leaving just enough room for him to squeeze in on the other side. Each time he entered and exited his truck, I watched through my window, feigning innocence while secretly reveling in the irritation I could see on his face. It was satisfying, almost therapeutic, to see that he wasn't as invincible as he thought. But then things escalated. My friends, noticing my discontent, encouraged me to take bolder steps. Why not put a note on his windshield? One suggested, her eyes gleaming with mischief. As I considered it, I found myself grinning, even laughing at the thought. I realized that under my layers of frustration, there was a part of me that hadn't felt this alive in years. The next day, I printed out a small, sarcastic note, "Hey Kyle, I love your truck. It makes my car look even smaller." I slipped it under his windshield wiper before I rushed to my car, heart pounding with adrenaline. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of him walking toward his truck, confusion written all over his face. I chuckled, the tight knot of anger slowly loosening as I imagined his reaction. But Kyle's retaliation was swift. He responded with a sharply written note of his own and shoved it into my mailbox, full of bravado and threats that he'd take care of the little car issue if I didn't back off. I felt my heart race, a mix of anger and fear igniting within me. This wasn't just a game, it was turning into a war. But part of me felt invigorated. I was no longer just the nice neighbor. I was fighting back. As I stood in my kitchen, staring at the note, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. This was not just about a parking space anymore, it had become very personal. I was reclaiming my space, not just in the driveway but in this neighborhood, in my life. I could feel the scales tipping, and the thrill of vengeance coursed through me. I was determined to win this battle, whatever it took. And that's when I knew, this was just the beginning. The days that followed turned into a relentless cycle of cat and mouse, and what I thought would simply be a harmless game escalated into a full-on war. Kyle, oblivious to the fact that he was fighting against an underestimated woman, began acting out with even more audacity. It was as if my little jab had awakened a sleeping giant, and now he was determined to assert his dominance in the most obnoxious ways possible. Each morning, I woke up with a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. Would he park even closer to my car today? Would he retaliate with another nasty note? The tension in the air was palpable. And it wasn't just about the parking anymore, it was the idea of reclaiming my territory. I felt like a queen defending my castle, emboldened by the thrill of battle. One evening, as I returned home from work, I couldn't help but notice that Kyle had moved his truck even closer than before, so close, in fact, that I was forced to park on the street rather than deal with the frustration of squeezing into my own driveway. The glare of my headlights caught the glint of his truck's chrome rims as if they were mocking me. That was it, I had reached my breaking point. In an impulsive rush of anger, I decided to take my tactics up a notch. I posted a series of exaggerated warnings on our neighborhood's Facebook page, cleverly crafted but dripping with sarcasm. Attention! There's a monster lurking in our neighborhood, beware the lifted truck that terrorizes small cars. I even included a picture of Kyle's truck, distorted with a funny filter that made it look like a cartoonish bull. The likes and responses flooded in, my friends rallied around my cause, encouraging me and sharing their own stories of inconsiderate neighbors. But as the attention on my post grew, so did Kyle's fury. That night, I heard his truck rumbling to life at 2 a.m., the sound reverberating through my walls, shaking my very foundation. My heart raced as I peered through the curtains, seeing Kyle sitting in the driver's seat, the headlights illuminating him like a spotlight in a twisted drama. He was clearly trying to send a message, he wouldn't back down easily. The following day, I woke to an unexpected surprise. My car was covered in a layer of sticky, dripped-down substance, maple syrup. I couldn't believe my eyes. A wave of fury washed over me as I realized that Kyle had resorted to childish antics. The viscous liquid clung to the paint, and as I wiped it away with a rag, I felt my resolve hardening. This was war, and I couldn't just sit back and allow my emotions to dictate my actions anymore. I needed to hit him where it hurt, the one place a car enthusiast holds dear, his precious truck. I spent the next few days concocting a plan, all while maintaining my cool facade. As he pranced around the neighborhood, boasting about his truck to unsuspecting neighbors, I bided my time, my heart racing with anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. I knew Kyle had a car show coming up that weekend, a big event where he'd be showing off his beloved truck to a crowd of admirers. And that's when I seized my opportunity. Armed with a can of spray paint, I transformed my plan of attack into something that would leave a lasting impression. With careful precision, I scrawled my truck's bigger than your ego across the back of his vehicle, not something that would damage the paint, but something that would definitely draw attention. As I stood there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. What if I got caught? What if this escalated beyond my control? But part of me reveled in the thrill of being a rebel, standing up against the bully in our neighborhood. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of commotion outside. Curious, I peered out the window and found a small crowd gathered around Kyle's truck, their delighted laughter cutting through the air like music. I felt a pang of satisfaction as I observed Kyle's face twist in disbelief and rage, the words I had painted glaring back at him under the bright sunlight. But then he saw me. Our eyes locked for a split second, and I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. A mix of shock and fury washed over his face, and I could feel the heat of his glare as he stormed toward my house, fists clenched and jaw set. The excitement of the crowd dimmed as they sensed the tension brewing between us, our little feud now a spectacle for all to witness. "Joanna," he shouted, his voice slicing through the chatter of the crowd like a knife. "You think this is funny? You think you can just disrespect my property like that?" I stepped out of my house, heart racing, but I stood my ground. "You crossed the line, Kyle. You've been a total jerk, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me." I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through my veins as I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos. His face flushed crimson, and for a moment, I thought he might back down. But instead, his rage only deepened. "You don't know who you're messing with. This isn't over, Joanna." As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a rush of victory mixed with a sense of dread. I had provoked the beast, and now there was no turning back. This was no longer a simple dispute over parking. It had transformed into a bitter rivalry that threatened to consume both our lives. The stakes were higher than ever, and as I lay down that night, the weight of what I had done settled heavily on my chest. I was in deep, and I had no idea how far Kyle would go in retaliation. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. I could feel it, the fight was intensifying, and I was ready to meet him blow for blow. There was no backing down now, I was in it to win, no matter the cost. The following week felt like a fever dream, each day straddling the line between exhilaration and dread. I wasn't just a woman fighting back against an obnoxious neighbor anymore. I was caught in a whirlwind of escalating tension, and every moment seemed to push me further into this bizarre rivalry. Kyle was fueled by my little graffiti stunt, and retaliation seemed imminent. The night after the crowd had dispersed, I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the thought of what Kyle might do next. Visions of his furious face swirled in my mind, an unsettling mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. What if he comes after me? I wondered. What if he vandalizes my car? What if he tries to intimidate me? But then I remembered the thrill I felt when I painted those words on his truck, the rush of reclaiming my space, my dignity. The very act of taking a stand had awakened something inside me that I thought I buried long ago. I wasn't just Joanna, I was a force to be reckoned with. It was a powerful realization, one that made my heart race with possibilities. The next afternoon, as I returned home from work, I spotted Kyle parked in front of his house, his truck gleaming under the afternoon sun. He was pacing back and forth, phone to his ear, probably ranting about me to someone. His demeanor radiated an arrogance I had grown to despise. But instead of fear, I felt something shift within me, a sense of defiance that I couldn't ignore. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of opportunity in the chaos. Kyle had left his garage door wide open, revealing an enticing array of tools and shiny accessories for his beloved truck. A thought flickered through my mind, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The turning point had arrived. In a heartbeat, I felt the thrill of revenge coursing through me again, but this time, it was different. Instead of the rash decision to vandalize, I envisioned an act that would strike where it hurt most, his pride. I could imagine the look on his face if I managed to make a fool of him at his own game. It wasn't about destruction, it was about humiliation. I quickly formulated a plan as I stood there, my heart racing with excitement. I approached him under the guise of civility, forcing a smile and waving. "Hey, Kyle. Nice truck you got there." He shot me a glare that could curdle milk but was too preoccupied to engage me. I couldn't help but feel a rush of power in knowing that I was under his skin. I was thinking about throwing a little parking competition, I began, carefully watching his reaction. You know, to see who can park the best in our little neighborhood. Winner gets bragging rights, and maybe a trophy. The moment I suggested it, I felt a surge of energy, a gleeful spark igniting my plan. Kyle's brow furrowed, and for a second, I thought he might scoff at the idea. But then I saw it, a flicker of intrigue beneath his irritation. "What's this? You think you can outpark me?" He challenged, crossing his arms over his chest, his ego visibly puffed up. "Why not? I may drive a smaller car, but I'll show you how it's done." I replied, my voice steady and confident. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if sizing me up for a battle. "You're on, Joanna. Just remember, you asked for it." As he accepted the challenge, I felt the adrenaline rush through my veins like a drug. The gears in my mind began to churn as I crafted a plan that would leave him utterly baffled. I wanted to turn his arrogance against him, to orchestrate a spectacle that would draw the entire neighborhood's attention and make him question his own pride. It was all too perfect. I could already envision the day of the competition, a crowd of curious neighbors gathering around as Kyle, filled with confidence, would underestimate my determination. It was clear to me now, the stakes had never been higher, and I was prepared to flip the script, to take my revenge in a way that was as poetic as it was satisfying. The thrill of it all left me breathless. I could see my victory, even before the competition began. By turning the gathering of spectators into an audience for my retribution, I was no longer just Joanna, the nice neighbor. I had transformed into a challenger, ready to unveil the foolishness of my neighbor's ego while simultaneously reclaiming my standing in the community. As the sun began to set that evening, casting a warm golden glow across the neighborhood, I stood outside, heart racing as I lit the spark of my plan. This wasn't just an act of revenge, it was my way of taking back control, transforming the narrative, and finally showing Kyle that he had underestimated me all along. I didn't need to resort to petty vandalism or childish antics. Instead, I would use his own arrogance against him. The turning point had arrived, and I was ready to show Kyle, and everyone else, what it truly meant to take a stand. This was just the first act in a much larger drama, and I was ready to steal the show. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over my front yard, I felt a surge of confidence wash over me. I had a plan, and it was time to execute it with precision and flair. The upcoming parking competition would be the stage for my revenge, where I would artfully weave a narrative that turned Kyle's arrogance into a spectacle of humiliation. I knew I couldn't pull this off alone. To really make an impact, I needed the support of my fellow neighbors. After all, it was their laughter and camaraderie that would amplify the thrill of my victory. I began by casually mentioning the idea to a few close friends and sympathetic neighbors during our morning walks and coffee runs. I painted a picture of a friendly competition, filled with laughing children, cheering adults, and a homemade trophy that I would craft myself. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. "Oh, I'd love to see Kyle's face when he loses," one neighbor exclaimed, while another chimed in, "Count me in. I'll bring snacks for the crowd." Before I knew it, there was a buzz around the neighborhood about the impending showdown, and my heart raced with excitement. I decided to officially announce the parking competition on our community Facebook page, cleverly branding it the Suburban Showdown, Park Wars Edition. I outlined the details, promising fun, food, and, of course, a trophy for the winner. I cheekily included a photo of my car, a small, unassuming sedan, next to the monstrous silhouette of Kyle's truck, playfully captioned, "Let's see if size really matters." The post went viral within our little neighborhood, and soon it filled with comments from amused neighbors eager to witness the event. I could visualize the anticipation building, the laughter echoing, and Kyle would be none the wiser as he prepared for his grand display of arrogance. The day of the competition arrived, and I was up before dawn, painting a makeshift trophy in my living room, a gold-painted coffee mug mounted on a piece of wood with the words "Parking Champion" written in my best cursive. It was ridiculous, but it captured my spirit perfectly. As I finished up, I could hardly contain my glee at the thought of Kyle's reaction when he saw it. Next, I set the stage in front of our houses. I arranged colorful lawn chairs, laid out a picnic blanket for snacks, and prepared a cooler filled with drinks. I even set up a scoreboard that I made using cardboard, ready to track the parking attempts. This was going to be a neighborhood event, and I aimed to make it as entertaining as possible. As the hour approached, I donned a bright, ridiculous outfit, a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses, hoping to channel my inner cheerleader. I wanted to play up the fun atmosphere, and my neighbor, Lucy, even brought a portable speaker to play upbeat music to enhance the festive vibes. When Kyle finally strolled outside with a swagger, I caught a glimpse of the smug smile on his face, clearly brimming with confidence. He had no idea what he was stepping into. As he made his way to his truck, I called out, "Hey, Kyle. Ready to show everyone how to park like a pro?" His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, but he couldn't dismiss the excitement bubbling around him. With neighbors gathering and kids running to grab their seats, Kyle's bravado was met with an audience that was all too eager to see how this would unfold. The rules were simple. Each participant would have one shot to park their vehicle in the spot I had cleverly selected, right next to my own car. The audience would judge based on creativity, precision, and style. I could hardly suppress my laughter as I imagined the absurdity of it all. I went first, expertly maneuvering my compact car into the parking spot with a flourish. I slipped out, bowing dramatically to the cheers of my friends. Not bad for a small car, right? I winked, basking in the applause. Now it was Kyle's turn. He approached his truck, a triumphant smirk on his face as he revved his engine for effect. "Watch and learn, everyone," he bellowed, his confidence palpable as he swung his truck into motion. As he attempted to park, though, things quickly took a turn. Instead of the precision he expected, he miscalculated the distance and ended up encroaching on my side of the driveway, wheels on the line, inching dangerously close to my precious little car. The chorus of gasps from the audience was music to my ears. As he climbed out of his truck, adrenaline coursing through him, I made my move. "Looks like you're straddling the line there, Kyle." Not quite what I expected from the parking pro, huh? I laughed, the teasing remark earning me a round of applause from the crowd. His face flushed, the smugness replaced with confusion and embarrassment. "This isn't done yet," he retorted, trying to brush it off, but the crowd was already buzzing with laughter. I could see his confidence waning. It was glorious. But I wasn't done. I had one last card to play. I had prepared a surprise for the end of the competition, a mystery judge who would ultimately decide the winner. As the competition wrapped up, I announced, "And now for the final decision, I present to you a surprise guest judge." I had enlisted the help of Mr. Thompson, the grumpy old man who lived at the end of the block. Known for his sharp tongue and disdain for arrogance, he was the perfect choice. As he shuffled over, cane in hand, he surveyed the spectacle with a raised eyebrow. After a few rounds of judging, and with Kyle's truck still awkwardly parked on my territory, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, folks, it's clear who the better driver is. The one who knows how to park without taking up 2 spaces. I give my vote to Joanna." The crowd exploded in cheers, laughter, and applause, and I felt a rush of triumph surge through me. Kyle stood there, fists clenched, incredulous as the crowd erupted around me, lifting me on their shoulders in celebration. As Kyle stalked back to his truck, furious and humiliated, I relished the sweet taste of victory. He had been stripped of his arrogance, exposed, for the inconsiderate neighbor he was, and I had reclaimed my dignity in the process. From that day forward, the dynamic in our neighborhood shifted. I wasn't just the nice neighbor anymore, I was a formidable presence. Kyle, on the other hand, became the cautionary tale, the neighbor who let his ego get the best of him. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for myself, reclaiming my space, and reminding everyone around me that sometimes, as the echoes of cheers still vibrated in the air, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was no longer just Joanna, I was a phoenix rising from the ashes of my previous frustrations, and the climax of my revenge was finally unfolding before my eyes. The moment Kyle realized he had lost, not just the competition, but the respect of our neighbors, was etched into my memory. His face contorted into an expression of rage and disbelief, a mix of embarrassment and indignation that felt like sweet justice. "You think this is funny, Joanna?" He spat, the words dripping with venom as he stormed back to his truck. But I wasn't going to let him retreat in anger. I needed to confront him, to let him know that I stood unwavering in my victory. I collected my thoughts, took a deep breath, and approached his truck, the very embodiment of confidence. The crowd, sensing the tension, hushed, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. "Listen, Kyle," I said, my voice steady and assertive, "I'm glad we could finally settle this. Maybe now you'll think twice before you park next to my car without regard for my space. This isn't just about parking, it's about respect." His anger sparked as he glared at me, yet a part of him seemed to recognize the truth in my words. "Respect? Are you kidding me?" He scoffed, crossing his arms. You've just made a fool out of me in front of everyone. I forced a smile, relishing the poetic nature of his predicament. No, you did that all on your own, Kyle. Maybe if you spent less time flaunting your truck and more time respecting your neighbors, this wouldn't have happened. In that moment, I could see a shift in the crowd's energy. They were no longer mere spectators to an amusing contest, they were witnesses to a transformative moment. I could almost hear their silent cheers, a collective acknowledgement that I had stood my ground and come out on top. Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a brief second, I thought he might lash out physically. But instead, he sighed, the fight visibly leaving him. Whatever, Joanna. You won this round. Just don't think I'll give up that easily. He climbed into his truck, slamming the door behind him, and the sound reverberated through the neighborhood as he cranked the engine. But I was ready for him. I had anticipated his exit, and just as he backed out, I raised my handmade trophy high above my head. Don't forget, Kyle. I'll be waiting for a rematch. And next time, maybe try parking a little less like a jerk. The crowd burst into laughter and applause, a triumphant roar that shook the very air around us. Kyle's face flushed with fury, but I could see he was outnumbered. He accelerated down the street, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving behind a flurry of dust and a community that had finally taken a stand against his arrogance. As the dust settled, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over me, elation, relief, triumph. My heart swelled with pride as my neighbors began to gather around, clapping me on the back and congratulating me. You really showed him, Joanna. A woman exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. The crowd rallied around me, celebrating not just my victory, but the empowerment I had ignited within them. In that moment, I felt like a champion, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever felt trampled by a bully. This victory resonated deeper than any petty revenge. It was a clarion call for respect, boundaries, and community. I lifted the trophy high once more, basking in the glow of approval and laughter. Next time, we'll have even more challenges, I declared, the crowd cheering in response. Who wants to join me for an obstacle course? We'll show Kyle that size doesn't matter when it comes to fun. As the cheers rang out, I felt a sense of kinship with my neighbors. We were all in this together, united by the common thread of standing up for what was right. I knew this day would be remembered as a turning point, for not just me, but for everyone who had grown tired of Kyle's antics. In that climactic moment, I learned that true courage comes not from seeking revenge but from finding strength in standing up for yourself and your community. The thrill of triumph filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had reclaimed my place in this neighborhood not just as a neighbor, but as a force of change. And as the sun set behind us, casting golden rays over our little gathering, I realized that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where kindness and respect reigned supreme, and where I would continue to fight for what mattered, one day at a time. The days that followed the suburban showdown, Park Wars edition, were nothing short of surreal. I felt like I was walking on air, buoyed by the euphoria of the victory. But as with any battle, the aftermath wasn't without its consequences, and I was about to learn that the thrill of triumph can be accompanied by its own set of complexities. After that unforgettable day, Kyle seemed to retreat into his shell, sulking beneath the veneer of his truck like a wounded animal. The once boisterous engine roars and obnoxious bass beats that echoed through our neighborhood faded. It was almost eerie, a void left in his absence. My initial sense of victory began to shift into something more contemplative. Had I pushed him too far? Had I crossed a line that might have repercussions beyond just parking disputes? As the weeks went by, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who were now rallying around me, not just because I had stood up to Kyle, but because I had ignited a spirit of camaraderie in our neighborhood that had long been dormant. Potluck dinners sprung up, and the sense of community seemed to flourish like never before. For every handshake and supportive message I received, however, there was a lingering shadow of doubt that crept in. One evening, as I sat on my front porch sipping iced tea and enjoying the summer breeze, I caught a glimpse of Kyle. He was sitting in his garage, staring at his truck with that same defeated expression that had marred his face after the competition. I felt an impulse to confront him, to approach him and offer peace. But would that undermine my small victory? Would it show weakness? I hesitated, the conflict raging in my mind. A few days later, our community organized a cleanup effort at the local park, and I couldn't resist getting involved. As I gathered with neighbors to pick up trash and paint benches, I noticed Kyle's father, Mr. Davis, attending the event. He was a kind man, always waving hello and sharing stories about his grandchildren. I approached him, and as we chatted, I learned that Kyle had been struggling with some personal issues, including a recent breakup and work stress. It shed a new light on his erratic behavior. I realized he wasn't just a bully but perhaps a man who was battling his own demons. Feeling a flicker of compassion, I decided to take action, something that surprised even me. The following week, I baked a batch of cookies, an olive branch if you will, and walked over to Kyle's house. I hesitated at his front door, nervously fiddling with the plate of cookies as I contemplated the potential outcome. When Kyle opened the door, his expression was one of shock, not rage. I could see the weariness etched on his face, the remnants of the bravado that had once defined him now stripped bare. "What do you want, Joanna?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things escalated," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I think we both got a bit carried away. I know we can have our differences, but I'd rather not stay in an endless battle with you." He blinked at me, seemingly caught off guard. "Are you serious?" he retorted, skepticism hanging in the air. "You're not mad about the cookies being carbs?" I chuckled, the tension slowly dissipating. "No, I'm just hoping we can start fresh. Maybe work together on keeping our neighborhood great instead of fighting over parking spaces." For the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, and it felt like a breakthrough. He sighed, the walls around him crumbling just a bit. "I guess I've been an ass. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I'm just trying to figure some things out in my life, and I took it out on you." At that moment, I felt a rush of empathy for him. We were both flawed humans stumbling through life in search of respect and belonging. The lines of rivalry blurred, and instead of reveling in my triumph, I felt a sense of shared humanity. Kyle took the plate of cookies with a hesitant smile, and as I turned to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe in seeking revenge and reclaiming my space, I had also unwittingly opened a door to understanding. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between us began to shift. Kyle joined our community cleanup efforts, and as I worked alongside him, we found ourselves engaged in light banter rather than petty arguments. It became clear that beneath the bravado, he was just a guy trying to navigate a challenging chapter in his life, one that bore resemblance to my own struggles. Eventually, through mutual respect and camaraderie, the rift began to close, and our neighborhood began healing from the wounds of rivalry. Our once silent conversations slowly morphed into sincere exchanges about work and life, and, surprisingly, I found myself enjoying his company. It was a strange turn of events, and by the time summer rolled into fall, a semblance of friendship emerged from the ashes of animosity. I even found the courage to invite him to our next neighborhood potluck, and to my surprise, he showed up with a homemade dish, an attempt to contribute that spoke volumes of his own growth. As I look back at the tumultuous journey from that initial parking dispute to the camaraderie we now shared, I realized that sometimes revenge isn't the answer. The victory I had sought in standing up against Kyle had morphed into something greater, a deeper understanding of not just my own motivations, but of another person's struggles. In the end, the lesson was profound. Revenge may provide a fleeting thrill, but empathy and respect have the power to heal and transform relationships. Life is too short to remain tethered to grudges. The real victory lies in forging connections where animosity once reigned. And so, as I sat with my neighbors laughing and sharing stories while the leaves began to turn golden, I couldn't help but smile. I had learned that in seeking to reclaim my place, I had inadvertently built a community, a place where kindness, respect, and understanding could flourish, even amidst the most unexpected of rivalries. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voices that echo the longest, it's the quiet gestures of understanding that truly resonate. In the drama of life, the greatest plot twists often come not from vengeance, but from the courage to extend a hand instead of a fist. And that, I knew, would forever shape the narrative of our little suburban neighborhood. Who would have thought? I'm used to myself, laughter echoing in the background. All it took was a parking feud to find our way back to each other.